Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly monumental. We're looking at one of India's absolute powerhouses, the Mughal Empire. For an incredible 330 years, this empire was literally a titan of wealth, culture, and sheer military might. It shaped the subcontinent so deeply that you can still feel its impact today. But this isn't a story about winning forever. It's actually the story of a spectacular, drawn-out collapse. We're going to trace the 150-year domino effect that completely erased a giant. Which brings us to a really fascinating historical mystery, and honestly one that holds a mirror up to any superpower today. How does a 330-year empire just vanish? I mean, we're talking about a massive, deeply established superpower. A dynasty that felt completely permanent, rooted in the soil of India for over 3 centuries. How could something so huge, so seemingly invincible, end up completely destroyed? Well, that is exactly the puzzle we're going to solve today. Okay, let's dive right in. We'll trace this tragedy through 6 stages. We'll start with the unthinkable collapse, track the first cracks in 1707, look at the internal decay, the devastating Persian plunder, the arrival of the East India Company, and finally, the ultimate lesson we can learn from all of this. Part 1, the unthinkable collapse, mapping a giant. Before we uncover the rot, we really have to grasp the sheer, unimaginable scale of this empire at its absolute peak. You just can't fully appreciate the fall without seeing the incredible height they tumbled from.
At its absolute zenith, the borders were just staggering. We're talking stretching from Kabul in the northwest all the way across to the rivers of Bengal in the east. From the freezing peaks of Kashmir up north, straight down to the Deccan Plateau in the south. It was a true behemoth. But as we'll see, those massive borders would eventually fracture, rapidly dissolving into isolated, vulnerable, and completely fragmented regional territories.
To understand how that massive map shrank so violently, we've got to watch the dominoes fall. The chain reaction sparks right here in 1707 with Aurangzeb's death, pushes forward to Nader Shah's invasion in 1739, really accelerates at the Battle of Plassey in 1757, and hits ultimate collapse in 1857 with the Sepoy Mutiny. So, let's take a closer look at that very first domino. Part 2, 1707, the first cracks, the death of an emperor. This is the exact inciting incident where the sturdy foundation of this 330-year empire started to violently shake. So, in the year 1707, Emperor Aurangzeb dies, and his passing triggered an absolute nightmare, a bloody civil war for the throne. Instead of a smooth, organized transition of power, basically every prince selfishly declared themselves the next emperor. They put their own blind ambition way above the stability of the realm. This threw the entire royal family into total chaos, pitting brother against brother, and it just completely drained the empire's resources right from the very top. Part 3, internal decay and rebellions, the rot inside. Once the royal family started destroying itself, the empire basically hollowed out from within. The guys who actually managed to grab power in the aftermath, they were just shadows of their predecessors. They completely lacked the political and military skills of the emperors who originally built the dynasty. And because of this constant infighting and terrible management, the royal treasury slowly began to empty out. And, when the money dries up, loyalty disappears right along with it. Provincial governors out in the territories saw this glaring weakness and simply stopped listening to orders from the central authority in Delhi. They effectively went totally rogue. With Delhi losing its grip, a massive power vacuum opened up all across the subcontinent. The Marathas saw their chance and rapidly expanded their power, carving out huge swaths of territory. Up in Punjab, the Sikhs declared hard-fought independence and established their own formidable domain. Meanwhile, various regional Nawabs, who were supposed to be loyal governors to the emperor, they just cut ties and broke away to rule their own lands as independent kings. That giant map we looked at earlier, it was literally being carved up right before their eyes. Moving on to Part 4, 1739, the Persian plunder, shattering the illusion. While the empire rotted internally, the predators were watching. And this brings us to a climax of absolute humiliation. In 1739, the Persian ruler Nader Shah spotted the vulnerability of the Mughals, and he unleashed utter devastation. He didn't just attack, he marched right into the capital city of Delhi and unleashed a brutal sack of the city. And to add profound insult to injury, he ripped away the empire's literal crown jewels. He stole the legendary peacock throne, and he even took the world-famous Kohinoor diamond.
Now, the theft of the Peacock Throne and the Kohinoor wasn't just a massive loss of wealth, it was a devastating loss of their aura. The illusion of Mughal invincibility was officially shattered. This single event exposed to the entire world that the Mughals were no longer unbeatable. The giant was bleeding, and now everybody could see it.
Part 5. Enter East India Company, the fatal blow. Here is the final external catalyst that happily just walked right through the doors left wide open by internal decay.
The arrival of the British East India Company was this sinister, gradual evolution. It began, innocently enough, as a commercial enterprise, just merchants looking for trade. But as they recognized the political fragmentation of the Nawabs and the glaring weakness coming out of Delhi, they eagerly stepped right into politics. They started manipulating regional rivalries to their advantage. And, inevitably, politics escalated into outright war. They transitioned all the way from mere businessmen to full-blown conquerors.
The boiling point arrived at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. This was the pivotal shockwave that permanently turned the tide of Indian history. Winning this battle allowed the British to slowly but surely seize control of most of the Indian regions. Because the subcontinent was so deeply fragmented by this point, it made it incredibly easy for a unified, heavily armed corporate military to just sweep in and take over.
The final act of this tragedy played out exactly a century later. The 1857 Sepoy Mutiny rocked the subcontinent, serving as this desperate last gasp of resistance. In the bloody aftermath, the British captured the very last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, and painfully exiled him to Rangoon. With his departure, the final curtain dropped. This marked the official tragic end of the 330-year rule of the Mughal Empire.
Part 6. The final lesson, why empires die. We've watched the dominoes fall over 150 years. But what exactly triggered the collapse? See, it wasn't one single catastrophic event. It was a completely toxic combination. It began with weak successors and a dividing civil war, which naturally bled right into a crippling economic crisis and an empty treasury. This internal weakness birthed the unchecked rise of regional powers, leaving the door wide open for Nader Shah's humiliating invasion, and finally, the creeping, fatal dominance of the British East India Company. 6 fatal causes locking together to completely seal the fate of a titan. History really teaches us a universal truth here. Empires rarely fall to external enemies alone. Internal weakness is what truly pushes them to ruin. The Mughals were rotting from the inside long before the final blow was struck from the outside. Which leaves us with a pretty critical question to ask of the superpowers we see today. What internal weaknesses are modern empires ignoring right now? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.